It is a loaded offensive tackle class in the 2024 NFL Draft. So we had offensive line expert Brandon Thorn to rank the top 5. Let's get it.
This is Renner Ranks, the ultimate NFL ranking show. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
To today's Renner Ranks, your go-to daily rankings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And a special thank you to all the everydayers out there who make this your go-to daily rankings podcast. Don't forget you can subscribe, like, follow for free, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, helps a lot. I am your host, Mike Renner, NFL draft analyst for The Messenger at Mike Renner _ on social media. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Very excited about today's episode. Offensive tackles with none other than Brandon Thorn. If you don't know who he is, go follow him on Twitter at Brandon Thorn NFL. He tweets more offensive line clips, O-line and D-line than anyone else I know. He watches all the tape of every NFL offensive line play every single week. The guy is extremely knowledgeable. So when he talks about line play, and especially these 2024 NFL draft prospects, I listen. You should listen. Let's get into it. All right, Brandon, the resident offensive line expert here. We're going to kick it to you first. Who is your number 5 OT in this upcoming draft class?
Yeah, right now, for me, it's kind of a tie, really. But, I mean, right now, I'll go number 5, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma. Right tackle. Still pretty young guy, TCU transfer, his second year with the program at Oklahoma. But, I think you got to start with him with, the physical traits, 6'7", 325, 330, and just his build at that size and how well he carries it, is pretty rare, pretty special. So I think that's like the first thing, kind of like the foundation of his game. And then he's very physical. As well, plays with, of course, kind of that traditional Oklahoma offensive line demeanor where all those guys are good finishers. He certainly is one of those, at least with effort. But he does fall off, some blocks each game. He kind of the finer aspects of the position are still coming along. They're not quite there. But, physically, I can make the case that, he's up there with anyone in this class. And, if you're going to bet on traits, he's one of those guys, I think.
Guyton, when I first watched his tape over the summer and I'm watching him play, I hadn't looked up anything about him other than, just knew he was a prospect. And I'm just in awe of how quick that guy got out of his stance, the explosiveness. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, what is he, 295, 300, just scraping. It's oh no, he's 325. That guy packs a punch at that size. But my biggest thing with him, so he didn't make my top 5, is just from last year's tape to this year's tape. I don't know if I've seen enough of an improvement. And so I was high on him. I think I had him in the 30s range coming into this year. And I think I had him as OT5 coming in. And I just think he's been passed up by some of these guys. I don't think he's necessarily, I think he's still a fringe first round prospect in my eyes. But I just think there's more guys playing better football right now in this OT class. So I have him just a little outside my top 5 at the moment.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
So my number 5 then is going to be Taliesa Fuaga, the Oregon State offensive tackle. 6'6", 330. And he reminds me a little bit at that size of a Christian Darrisaw. And I don't think that's a great one-to-one comp. But just in that it's so casual how easily he tosses guys around. And it's just it doesn't look like he's doing much of anything. And then all of a sudden, a linebacker gets bounced, 3 yards down the football field because he's just so head to toe. Just powerful, just massively powerful human being. And he doesn't really, a lot of the guys that are Tyler Guyton, you're saying he's an aggressive, powerful guy. Fuaga's just under control, goes about his business, and he punishes guys on a snap-to-snap basis. So really an obvious tape. I think he's a 4th-year player, ascending 2-year starter. I think he's a guy that has probably worked his way in the first-round conversation at this point.
Yeah, I've been watching him lately. I've seen I think 3 games so far. And yeah, man, I mean, I think the most impressive, I have him right below Guyton. Him and my number 4 guy are really tightly bunched right now and very fluid, I would say. But yeah, I think when you watch him at his size, I agree with you. The control that he plays with, his posture, right? He keeps his head out of blocks.
Yep.
He keeps things in front of him. Really good patience, but he balances that well with the aggressiveness. And I really like the skill that he has. I do think when you really kind of dial into that UCLA tape, Latham didn't rush over him a whole lot, but you could see some of the little bit of sluggishness there in his body, not a lot of, twitch to redirect. If he, I think the margin for error for him is pretty small in pass protection if he's isolated out there, but he could function at a very high level within a kind of a friendly scheme, I think, for sure. But in terms of living out there on an island against high level guys, I don't know if he's going to be doing that necessarily at the next level, but maybe a higher floor, I think, than Guyton, at least this year. But yeah, that's kind of how I see him. But I'm really impressed with the patience and the control and stuff like that. I see it. And then, him getting up to the second level is fun. And he gets out of his stance really quick. He functions at a high level in their zone scheme, as well, which at his size is impressive. So he's not like a slug or anything, but I just think, there is kind of a cap there. That's what I've seen so far.
I tend to agree. I think that's a good way to describe it. Just capped in pass protection. Like he's just not quite as swift as you would like it to be. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Who's your number 4?
Yeah. Number 4 for me is Patrick Paul from Houston. And like I said, Paul, Guyton, and Fuaga right now are very fluid. That's not set in stone yet. But yeah, Patrick Paul, just a tiny bit of an edge over Guyton. I mean, it's kind of hard to watch Houston in general this year, but Patrick Paul, again, another guy with the physical traits in terms, he's 6'7" again, and a little bit lighter than Guyton, think like 315, but crazy long arms, 36 plus, and he does kind of get in trouble with that length in terms of being a little late with his hands, which is something that you see with guys when they have this crazy length. It's very easy for them to be late with their hands and let guys get inside their chest. But I think he has the play strength to kind of mitigate that a little bit. And if he does clean up his hands, man, I mean, he could probably be a plus starter, I think, above average or better starter. Right now, I don't necessarily see him like inserting himself into that right away as a pro. But, right now I have a 2nd round grade on pretty much all these guys we've talked about so far. And that's kind of how I see him. But he moves pretty well, and I love his demeanor. I mean, he is one of the best finishers in the class. He's nasty. And you got to watch the sideline copy when you're studying his tape because there's some crazy finishes going on around the ball. So I appreciate that about him as well. So stuff to clean up, but I really do like a lot of what he brings.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's like technically sound or consistent, but he seems to like find answers, even when it may not be the prettiest.
He's so strong.
Yeah. And so I do worry though about leaving his chest open and basically like, what would it look like if he played better competition, right? Because he's played some bigger schools this year. I think he's played Texas Tech. There's one other one I can't remember on the schedule that they played, but that's the guy I definitely want to see at like a Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, one-on-one type of, just to like really get a handle on where he's at in that perspective. So I didn't actually have him in my top 5, but I had him, Guyton, just outside my top 5. My number 4 is actually Jordan Morgan, Arizona left tackle. I think his body control at his size, so he's 6'5", 325. He reminds me a little bit of like a Deion Dawkins, and that is just like he controls that size so well. And now he's maybe not, there's nothing real special about him athletically. I wouldn't say he's the swiftest in this class. I wouldn't say there's anything like elite physically, but the body control, hands and feet work in unison, and then the balance. I just don't think like he'll strain to hold on to blocks better than a lot of guys in this class. And I just think that's a great trait to have at a tackle position where body control is everything. Like it's the guys who can really have full usage of their hands and keep that throughout the course of a play and throughout the course of a game that are the guys that win consistently. So I'm just a fan of his. I don't think he's, again, like anything special as a prospect. There's probably a ceiling to his game, but I just think you're getting a darn good offensive tackle at the next level. I think he has a real high floor in that regard too.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely get on board with you there. It's funny, like the first few games of the season, he was my tackle 4 too, I think. But the last couple of weeks, man, I've been noticing this reoccurring trend where he has a tendency to open up his hips and shoulders a little early. I think his range is maybe not quite suited for tackle in the pros. It's teetering on that line for me. Actually, just like the last couple of days, I I think I've kind of settled on projecting him as a guard.
Okay.
So that's why he's not here. But I think he plays UCLA this weekend. So that's kind of make or break my evaluation of him in terms of position projection. So that's going to be a huge game for him, I think. They do play UCLA this week, right?
I'm not sure. Actually.
I think they do, because I want to see him against Law too. So
yeah, I mean, and then the Murphy brothers are also like they got skill at least. They may not be high in prospects, but they're skilled.
Yeah, absolutely. So that game for me is kind of a make or break for him in a lot of ways, because I thought Braylon Trice gave him a ton of trouble with exactly what I'm talking about, opening up early and then getting the inside shoulder pried open and just getting beat across his face, getting pried open, repeatedly against Trice. And then against USC as well, I saw the same things against not as high level of a player. So the first few games I was very high. These last couple of games, I'm just kind of seeing like, maybe not as high end of a kind of a tackle guy as I thought. So maybe best inside, because I do think this guy is really strong. Core strength is really good when he's centered on blocks. But I have a hard time seeing him stay centered in the pros at tackle on an island. And that could become an issue, but maybe it's mitigated inside. I think he could work really well inside and be a good guard. So I don't know. But it's funny you mentioned Deion Dawkins, because I remember him coming out of Temple, same conversation. Is he a guard or a tackle? And, turns out he can play tackle at a high level. So that's a really cool name to bring up, because I think that's a kind of a good place to start with him.
Get back to the rankings in just a second. First, PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. We are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is really simple to play. You can make and submit picks in less than 60 seconds. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select players' projections up to 25% to provide even more value. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's LOCKEDON NFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. All right, who's your number 3 here in this class?
Yeah, number 3 for me is Jase Latham from Alabama. Man, I think he's the strongest tackle in the country. I think that's probably the best place to start. 6'6", and what is he now? I think he put on 20 pounds this past off season. He's 360, man. I mean, dude, he carries that very well. I think. And just the last few weeks, these edge rushers that are sub 250, Tennessee's guys are sub 250. Mississippi State a few weeks back were sub 250 guys. I mean, those guys have zero chance against Latham. So just so powerful, so big, so physically imposing. And I think that's like special. Of all these guys we talked about, I think that's probably the first like really like tier 1 kind of trait that we've, that we could talk about so far, is his play strength and power. So I'm kind of a sucker for that. It's a great place to start. I think he's still really young as well. I see this guy is locked in at tackle 3, if not, maybe a little bit higher. We'll see how the rest of the season goes, but I'm very high on him. Firm first round grade for him. And yeah, I think he's a stud, dude.
Yeah. The top 3, there's a clear delineation in my eyes. Yeah. These 3 are, they could all end up top 10 picks, the guys we're going to talk about, but right. Latham's my tackle 3 too. And what you mentioned, just the strength, he's like it's almost like a bigger Tyler Smith, and that is just so like it doesn't matter who it is, who he's going up against. Exactly. Like it's just such a dominant trait that no one can hang with them. And, I talked about casual power. There's nothing casual about him when he's on tape. Like he is ferocious trying to get guys, off the line of scrimmage onto the ground. He plays with a little mean streak at that position. Nowhere near like the pass protection of the top 2 guys we're going to talk about in terms of the consistency, but he could stay a tackle at that size. There's no reason that I've seen on tape from his feet to his hands that he shouldn't be able to figure it out. So
I agree.
Definitely big fan of his game.
It's good to hear. Yep.
All right, who's number 2 on your list?
Yeah, Joe Alt from Notre Dame. I've been blown away by him this year, man, just in terms of the polish in his game. The last 4 years that I've been watching, all the offensive line for Bleacher Report, he's probably the most polished guy I've seen, honestly. Just, exactly what you're getting with him, I think, and that's so rare for a college player. Every single tape is the same. He's just ruthlessly consistent in his technique. Not the most powerful guy, not the best anchor, but at 6'8", I've never seen a tackle with a good anchor, unless you're talking about Jonathan Ogden or something. So that's kind of, expected. You're going to kind of there's a little give and take there. But I just think the floor is high. And I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if he's great, but I would be shocked if he's not rock solid. I think that's kind of the best way to put it. He's like a bigger, longer, more physical Jake Matthews. That's kind of how I see it. And I mean, yeah, dude, I've just been so impressed with his technique. He's just, especially in the run game, like his ability to bend and create leverage with his hands consistently, his climbs to the second level. Everything is so just like fine-tuned. Like he knows exactly what he's doing. And I would love to, I'd feel very good about spending a first-round pick on that. So, yeah, I mean, he's fun to watch, man. He just blew me away. I wasn't expecting to like him as much as I have.
So his dad was an offensive tackle, but he feels like how like Patrick Surtain coming out, Patrick Surtain Jr., Antoine Winfield Jr., like those guys, just how they played corner and safety. That's what like Joe Alt feels, where it's just like, this guy has been learning it since he was probably like 3 years old. And he looks like it. Like that is what, technically how like 10-year veterans in the NFL look like. And he's doing that as a junior. And it's funny that you brought up Matthews too.
Bloodlines as well.
Because the bloodline's there, but also they're two of the most like baby-faced offensive tackles I've ever seen. Like Matthews looked like a high schooler coming out. Joe Alt looks like a kid, man. And he's 6'8", 322. Like he's head and shoulders above everyone when they come off the bus, but he looks like he's like 12 years old and just dominant, man. I mean, just as consistent as can be. If you wanted to take him over the guy we're going to talk at 1, like just out of the pure, what you're getting sort of thing, like you're getting the security of Joe Alt, like I wouldn't debate it. I still do think that the guy who's number 1 is a special prospect and will be an elite NFL offensive tackle. But I think Joe Alt's just like Pro Bowl type of floor, man. I just don't see how that's not the case here. We're going to get to the top of the class in just a second here. But first, today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. Did the game go into timeout? Time to order DoorDash. Is it halftime? That's ordering time. 2-minute warning? You got it. That's your cue to order in. Order chips, dips, nachos, or everything you need to make your own nachos on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing a game. I have to say, I haven't tried the actual ordering of things to make food, but that sounds interesting. Also sounds maybe a little lazy, but it's a weekend. What are you going to do when you're watching ball, right? All right. Get 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. That's 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more. So you got to really hit the needle there. You got to get between $15 and $20 to really take advantage of it. With code LOCKED23. Subject to change. Terms apply. All right, who's your number 1?
I'm pretty much in line with you there. So Olu Fashanu from Penn State. He would have been my number 1 tackle last class. So, that kind of says it all right there, how much I like him. And most people like him. But yeah, he's, just his natural skills blended with his physical traits and pass protection is as good as I've seen, the last 4 years for sure, if not just better. The run game stuff I think has gotten better, but it's not great. It's not bad. It's more kind of in the middle, not like the most physically imposing guy in terms of his demeanor, like Latham or, even Paul or something. But, I think he could be a highly functional run blocker. And I think he certainly get better as well. So especially with footwork and aiming points and landmarks, he kind of falls off some blocks here and there, but he certainly has the tools to get better there. But I mean, in a pass protection in a passing league, when his pass protection skills are as good as they are, I think he's kind of the no-brainer number 1, just, foot quickness and, natural ability to anchor, even though against Ohio State, he had a little trouble with that. Just he has his natural feel right away last year as a 19-year-old is just kind of reminiscent of Penei Sewell and what he did in the run game. as a prospect. So they're kind of inverse that way. But yeah, he's like on that level of a prospect to me.
Yeah, and I do think it's worth noting, you said it there, 19 years old last year, his first year starter. So he's fourth-year player, but he's still young. He's still 20 years old right now. So he'll be a 21-year-old rookie. Mm-hmm. And everything you said, I have him as OT1 too. I'm a massive Notre Dame homer, and I don't even have Joe Alt above him. That's how much, that's how good this guy is at the tackle position. To me, he's like probably, it reminds me of watching this tape like Laramie Tunsil coming out. And just in terms of they profiled to such high level in pass protection and how they were able to, get on guys. So just how light they were in their feet, how coordinated they use their hands, just like how they, can manipulate space between them and defenders. It's going to be good. Like it's going to be good, and it could be insane, right? It could be like as good as you see in the NFL in terms of pass protection. Like he has possesses those sort of traits. So yeah, this tackle class, the 1, 2, 3, I see the clear tier. Where do you think, so if you were to your top 5, where would you project those guys coming off the board right now? Olu, Alt, Latham, and then you had Paul and Guyton.
Yeah, I think Olu, probably top 5. After the 2 quarterbacks and Harrison, I'm probably him, so 4 or 5, I would say. And then Alt, probably top 10, Latham, probably top 10, maybe top 15. So I think those 3 will be off, in the top half of the first round. And then after that, I think it's kind of wide open. Like I said, Paul, Guyton, and Fuaga, I have second round grades on right now. We'll see how the rest of the year goes and whatnot for them. And just as we gather more information and all that, I think any one of those guys can go in the first round. There's always a tackle bump. If you have a second round grade on a tackle, they're probably going in the first. So if I'm projecting and not, basing it truly on my grade, I would say, at least 2 of those guys probably go in the first round. I think we're getting 5 minimum. Mm-hmm. And, it's 5 to 7, maybe, I don't think that's crazy. So there's even tackles outside of these names that, I like, not as first round guys, but this is a deep tackle class, I think.
That was the last thing I was going to ask you here. So the one of the guys we didn't talk about who's, could be in the mix for one of the top tackles is Amarius Mims, Georgia tackle. I don't know how much you've watched of him, but how do you deal with a guy who he's barely played football, got injured, I believe, week 3 of this season, only was a spot starter at the end of last season, really hasn't played, I think only like 500 snaps his entire career, 645 snaps his entire career here. What do you do with a guy like that as a project in the NFL if he would declare?
It's tough, like assuming he doesn't play the rest of the year too. That makes it really tough. I have a hard time seeing him come out in this class this year if he doesn't play the rest of the year. Hopefully he can return, but it's tricky. Obviously, he's, like you said, he's barely played. It's such a projection there that it's so highly dependent on where he goes. If he goes to Philly or something and they're grooming him, behind Lane or whatever, like, okay, then you can take him a lot earlier than if you were to go to, 90% of the other teams in the NFL. I think like in our position projecting, NFL wise and not for a team, like I would have a hard time picking him in the first round unless, all the off the field stuff was glowing and just like he checks all the boxes and he comes out and tests great and just checks that box. And then maybe, but like, yeah, I think when you watch him on film, obviously the height, the weight, the way he carries it, is really impressive. Early this year when I watched him, you could tell he's still very raw, especially in the run game, with like fits on double teams. Like it just seems like he just needs to play more football. I hope he comes back. He could be the top tackle next year. But yeah, it's hard, man. It just depends on the situation. I think it's so highly dependent on that for him.
Yeah, tackle is such a skill position. O-line in general is such a skill position that I'll always trend towards the guys with experience more than the wild card of what he could be. It's like those guys a lot of times you're year 3, year 4 still trying to talk yourself into what they could be. And then sometimes it just turns on, sometimes it doesn't, but you wasted, a lot of the rookie contract when that's the case. Well, Brandon, appreciate you coming on, man. Where should the people go find your work here?
Yeah, so Twitter, at Brandon Thorn NFL. Post a lot of stuff on there. Trenchwarfare.substack.com is my Substack, where I do a bunch of different work on the offensive and defensive line there, and then establish the run as well. I do all my rankings for OL and DL units there. So those are the spots you can find me.
Awesome stuff there from Brandon. As always, if you don't follow him on Twitter, make sure you go do that. If you don't follow Trench Warfare, would highly recommend it. I know it is paid subscription, but I think it's well worth the money. Next week, Monday, all 22 takeaways. Back at it again. Rest of the week, TBD, but looking forward to it. We got some bangers on the slate this weekend. Very excited for it. We will see you guys on Monday.